Freedom fighters, freedom lovers, and those who just want stuff for free. Greetings and salutations. It is I, your favorite obscure social studies teacher, who has a knack for making the past way more interesting than your high school textbook, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, folks. You know I always appreciate it. The tens and tens of you faithful followers across the fruited plain, and even over in Europe and Asia and beyond. If you want to send me your thoughts, your questions, your complaints, though I'll ignore those, your conspiracy theories, or just random musings about the universe, hit me up at ProfessorLiberty1776 at gmail.com. That's right, folks, ProfessorLiberty1776 at gmail.com. Once more, ProfessorLiberty1776 at gmail.com. Don't forget to like this podcast, write a written review, which pushes the algorithm into the abyss. Well, maybe not the abyss. That's not a good. It pushes it out into the ether where some kid will learn about history and how awesome it is to be American. You can also find me on Twitter or X, depending on how you want to say it. And Facebook Messenger is always an option. Boy, I tell you, I cannot get 100 followers on X. I guess they want you to buy that premium blue check, which I am not going to do because I don't make enough money as Professor Liberty. But over at Facebook, we've put years and years into work developing a fan base, and you guys are awesome out there. Very smart group of people. As a matter of fact, that's where I got that birthright citizenship episode. Last episode, birthright citizenship, growing by leaps and bounds, probably the most popular Professor Liberty episode ever, which means you guys are sharing with your friends, your family, and your communist cousin. Well, today's President's Day. And so before we start the show, I'd like to give you a little bit of presidential trivia. Did you know the last time a president had facial hair was Howard Taft? And that was back in 1912, folks. So it's been well over 100 years since a president has had facial hair. Maybe J.D. Vance, the current vice president, young man, first millennial vice president, by the way, maybe he will change that when he runs for president, and maybe he'll become the newest president with facial hair. He's got a pretty mean beard. Other trivia out there. How many presidents have been assassinated? I know this is kind of a dark trivia question, folks, but we don't shy away from things over here at Professor Liberty. 4 presidents have been assassinated while in office. Abraham Lincoln, 1865, James Garfield, 1881, William McKinley, 1901, and John F. Kennedy, 1963. John F. Kennedy has a lot of firsts, if you will. Youngest president to be elected. Now, not the youngest president, that was Theodore Roosevelt. Also, John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president. We have had another Catholic president since then, good old Uncle Joe. But it's still fresh in our minds, old Uncle Joe, so we're not going to talk about him much today. Also, going back to Theodore Roosevelt, first president to ride in an automobile. And one that I don't think many would get, the first divorced president. Think about it. Who do you think it is? This is going to be a shock to many of you. The first divorced president is Ronald Reagan, who was elected in 1980. And we've had 3 baby boomer presidents, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. Okay, one more, because I just love presidential trivia and history. I bore my students with this crap, but it's just something. Look, why do you become a teacher is because you know lots of random information. That's why you become a teacher. Okay, executive orders. The president with the least amount of executive orders is James Garfield at 73. The president with the most executive orders ever issued is Franklin Delano Roosevelt with a whopping 3,721. All right, guys, on to the show. We're about to dive into a topic that has not only shaped global trade, but it's also influenced the course of diplomacy, and it has sparked here recently heated debate, and that is the Panama Canal. This engineering marvel was one of the most iconic pieces of infrastructure on the planet. But here's a twist. Despite its importance, many people still have no idea how it came to be and why it's so essential for the United States specifically, but also for international trade. To understand the Panama Canal, we got to travel back in time, all the way to the 16th century. Early explorers like Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the first European to see the Pacific Ocean, you can still picture him today standing on the shores of Panama, this narrow strip of land called an isthmus in geography. Hey, I got to use a geographic term today. Another important isthmus would be where Byzantine Empire, otherwise known as Constantinople, otherwise known as Istanbul, is located, connecting Turkey, which is Asia, to Europe. So this idea of connecting the great oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, obviously in the 16th century, this was just a pipe dream. But even back then, they thought of trying to find a way to connect these two oceans so you don't have to traverse around the South American Cape, which is very touchy water. Fast forward to the 19th century when the dream of connecting the oceans was rekindled in a big way. Enter Ferdinand de Lesseps. He's the French engineer that mastered the Suez Canal in Egypt, and now he was on to a more ambitious project, the canal across Panama. So imagine this. Here's the challenge for engineers. Dense jungles with trees so thick they block out the sun, turning the land into a sweltering, suffocating swamp. Torrential rains turn the landscape into treacherous quagmire, washing away roads and causing mudslides that buried workers under tons of earth. And we haven't even gotten to the disease yet. Malaria, yellow fever, ravaged the workers, killing thousands. Every day, men succumbed to the deadly mosquitoes that carried these diseases. The French project for Panama, already plagued by technical and financial difficulties, was in all accounts doomed, and by 1880, they were forced to abandon the dream, leaving behind a half-finished canal and a graveyard of lost hopes. But that wasn't the end. The dream of the canal would not be buried in the jungles of Panama. It was about to be resurrected. Enter the United States in the early 1900s. The U.S. had its own vision for a canal, controlling global trade routes, enhancing military strategy, and establishing an economic foothold in the region. But they couldn't just pick up where the French left off. No, they needed something even more crucial before they could get to digging: land. And the only way to get the land was to ensure Panama's independence from Colombia. Enter Teddy Roosevelt, the cowboy president, and his Roosevelt corollary. What's a corollary? A corollary is an extension of a contract, an extension of a document. So the Roosevelt corollary was a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt corollary declared that the U.S. had a right to intervene in Latin America to maintain stability and protect its interests. With this policy in hand, Roosevelt supported Panama's bid for independence from Colombia in 1903, using threat of military action to sway the situation in the favor of the U.S. So this is that whole speak softly and carry a big stick. After independence was achieved, the U.S. quickly secured the rights to the land needed for the canal, cementing its influence in the region and setting the stage for a project that would forever change global trade. However, unlike the French, the Americans came well-equipped with an army of engineers, doctors, and workers, ready to wrestle the land into submission. They would face the same jungle, the same rains, the same diseases, the same mudslides, but this time they had something the French didn't: experience, technology, and a fierce determination to achieve their goal. The U.S. engineers would need to build locks, massive dams, and of course, the canal itself. Now, let's talk about these locks. You can look this up on the internet. Really interesting stuff. A lock is a large chamber like structure, and it acts as kind of an elevator. So the ship goes into this lock, it closes behind the ship, and the water is either drained to lower the ship or water's pumped in to raise the ship. You see, there's different elevations as you're crossing the isthmus, the Panama Isthmus. So essentially, the locks work as elevators, and the ship has to rise to the elevation, and then it goes through the canal, and then it lowers to the elevation needed. So pretty interesting stuff. So what else needed to be done to build the canal? Well, the workers had to clear the jungle and deal with that disease we talked about earlier. And working conditions were gruesome. They were grueling. Sometimes shift lasted 12 hours a day. Each inch of ground had to be conquered and every problem solved with sheer ingenuity and willpower. Construction wasn't just about digging, it was about survival every day. But finally, after 10 years of hardship, sweat, and blood, the Panama Canal opened on August 15, 1914, a triumph of human ingenuity and persistence. But what had once been impossible has now become a reality. The world has changed forever. But the story of the canal's creation doesn't just end with opening day. It continues to shape our politics, as we're going to talk about here in a second. So for the most part, for most of the 20th century, the Panama Canal was firmly in the hands of the United States. While the canal brought enormous economic benefits both to the U.S. and to the world, economically, the Panama Canal was a vital link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, drastically reducing shipping time and cost. Militarily, the canal was of immense strategic value. Even today, this is the case for the United States. It allowed the U.S. Navy to quickly move ships between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which was crucial during times of war, especially in conflicts like World War I and World War II. Control of the canal meant the ability to project power across both oceans, safeguarding American interests in both the Western Hemisphere and in the Pacific. It was a key asset in maintaining U.S. dominance in global military affairs. But by the 60s and the 70s, the Panamanian people were increasingly frustrated with the U.S. presence in their country. While the canal was a vital artery for global shipping, it was also a source of political tension. The Panamanians had no direct control over how the canal was operated, and the benefits they reaped from it were minimal compared to the profits flowing into American coffers. Furthermore, the United States had a military presence in the Canal Zone, a foreign military base in Panamanian soil, which became a point of contention for many Panamanians. Over the years, Panama had seen countries across Latin America push back against U.S. influence, and the sense of national pride was rising. This growing sense of Panamanian identity and the desire for sovereignty was emboldened by one man, Omar Torrijos. Torrijos, the military leader who took power in Panama after a coup in 1968, wasn't just a political figure. He became a powerful symbol of Panamanian resistance to American control. His rise to power was fueled by frustration of a population that had felt neglected in both the local elites as well as the foreign overseers. But Torrijos wasn't just about fighting for control. He also understood the delicate balance between negotiating for Panama's sovereignty and maintaining important relationships with the U.S. He understood that the U.S. could not easily be pushed out because of the canal's economic and military importance that we spoke about earlier. And this is where the Trujillo-Carter Treaty comes in. 1977 marked a pivotal moment in Panamanian history. After years of negotiating between Trujillo and the U.S. President Jimmy Carter, the two sides reached an agreement that would dramatically change the course and future of the canal. The Trujillo-Carter Treaty, signed in September of 77, laid out a clear and unprecedented plan for gradual transfer of control of the canal from the United States to Panama. The treaty states that while Panama will become the primary administrator of the canal, the United States still held military control during this transition period, ensuring the canal's security. A joint U.S. Panamanian Commission was created to help guide this transition, with both countries working together to oversee operations. The treaty also guaranteed, and this is crucial, the canal's neutrality, keeping it open to all nations, while Panama would regain sovereignty over the canal. This was a huge win for national pride for Panama. Additionally, the U.S. agreed to provide financial and military assistance to help Panama adjust to its new role. This is huge. This is like really, really huge, right? The treaty was groundbreaking for several reasons. For one, it set a clear timeline for transfer of control of the canal. Under the terms of the agreement, Panama would regain full control of the canal in 1999. So that's a 22-year transition period. But the road to the treaty wasn't as smooth as maybe I'm making it seem. There was considerable opposition within the United States, particularly from Republicans and conservative groups who felt that giving up control of the canal was a huge strategic mistake. There was also strong opposition from U.S. military leaders who feared that Panama could not maintain the security of the canal on its own. And this is, I think, what's coming back 40 years later. These fears are coming back, resurfacing. Yet President Carter remained steadfast, and he was convinced that the treaty was the right step for both countries, and it was crucial for the stability of Latin America. As years passed, both countries worked through the details, and the Panama Canal was transferred over to Panama on December 31st, 1999. Now let's fast forward to a more recent chapter in the story of the Panama Canal, one that has added a fresh layer of tension and complexity. The canal has been a long symbol of Panamanian sovereignty. I mean, if you think about it, what else do you think of Panama? The canal and bananas is all I got. Under the leadership of President Donald Trump, U.S. officials became increasingly wary of China's growing economic footprint in Panama. In 2017, Panama made a significant move by signing a trade agreement with China. The decision opened up the floodgates for a wave of Chinese investment into that country, specifically targeting infrastructure projects around the canal. But this wasn't just about trade. This is about China's ambitious Belt to Road Initiative, BRI. And this is a global program to build economic and trade infrastructure across the world. And as part of the initiative, China began investing heavily in projects related to ports and other crucial infrastructure along the Panamanian coast. And it's a massive financial commitment. But Panama is not alone in this. China's doing this all over the world. China's Belt and Road Initiative has spread across the globe, with countries in Africa, for example. Many countries in Africa are eager to accept billions of dollars in infrastructure investments, places like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zambia. These countries are desperate for the capital needed to build roads, railways, ports, and other projects to help their economy. But as much money that is needed, you all know strings are attached. In exchange for infrastructure and loans, many African nations are finding themselves in a position where they're giving up not just control of their economic future, they're also handing over vital resources, strategic infrastructure, and even sovereignty to China. Let's just be real, folks. This is a new form of modern colonialism. The premise is development, but it comes at a cost. It has political and economic costs, and most of that is independence. As China builds its influence through the Belt and Road Initiative, it's not just a matter of trade, it's economic leverage to extract long-term political control. And with this in mind, China's influence in Panama obviously raises some uncomfortable questions, especially for the United States. Remember, the Panama Canal isn't just a trade route. It's also vitally important for the United States for military operations. So now you can see, without the filter of the corporate media making Donald Trump just seem like a bozo, you can see how Donald Trump is voicing concerns publicly now, questioning Panama's decision to partner with China. And this is where the Trios-Carter Treaty neutrality clause comes into play. The treaty, as we discussed earlier, makes it clear that the Panama Canal should remain neutral and open to all nations. The idea that no nation should have the ability to control or manipulate the canal for their own exclusive interests. This concept of neutrality has become a source of tension with China's growing influence in the region. So what does the future hold for the Panama Canal? It remains a crucial part of global trade, with an estimated 12,000 ships passing through each year. The expansion project, which added a third set of locks, opened in 2016, allows for larger ships, accommodating the changing demand of international shipping. Some people say that China's Belt to Road initiative is violating at least the spirit of the neutrality clause of the Panama Canal Treaty. But here's my hot take on it, folks, and I know I'm going to ruffle some feathers with this comment. The Panama Canal is the United States Canal. The United States bought it. The United States built it. The United States invested in it. The United States procured Panama's independence. They wouldn't even be a country without the United States. The United States has the military might to protect it. Think of another world conflict like World War II. And Panama, for whatever reason, turned into Switzerland. And Panama said, you know what, we're not going to let your ships go through the canal. Is that going to happen, boys and girls? And if it did happen, what kind of security crisis would it create? You see, boys and girls, we are in this white guilt, superpower guilt mode, where we as the United States, I guess because we're the strongest, biggest, most powerful country in the world, we've just decided to let everyone take advantage of us. We supplement Canada's defense. We supplement NATO's defense. We supplement the EU's defense. And Donald Trump, in his second term, has come in and he says, we're not doing this anymore. Look how just the mention of a tariff gets people to change their mind within hours, not even days. And why is that, boys and girls? That's because they need us more than we need them. They need our markets more than we need their markets. And let me say one more thing. This is how China is acting. China is acting in their own self-interests. I know it's the 21st century and we don't do colonization anymore and we don't do imperialism anymore, but China is acting as an economic imperial power. They are moving across the globe and they are trying to trap people with their billions and billions in investments. And the United States needs to pay attention and stop worrying about hurting little countries' feelings and get in the game. And I think this is mostly what Trump is talking about. When he's talking about getting Greenland, buying Greenland, I think he's trying to project to China that we see you and we are going to match your energy. Now, to most people in the United States, because they went to a liberal arts college, all we can think about is gender ideology and race theory and critical. So every time Trump says something, we're like, oh my gosh, he's so mean. Look, guys, the world is still a scary place, and many countries only respond to power. They don't respond to talking. They don't respond to bending a knee. We have to project power. Many cultures around the world, many countries around the world only respond to that. And I don't think the United States is going to take the canal back over. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I do think is happening is President Donald Trump is saying there's a new sheriff in town. He has his mental capacities with him, and he's not going to play this game anymore where the United States just lets everyone step on us. Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. Also, go to ProfessorLiberty.com. You can listen to the podcast there, and you can check out the Proclaiming Liberty blog anytime you want to read something, and they're only about 2 or 3 minute reads. Also, go to teacherspayteachers.com and check out worksheets, activities, and things you can do for your homeschool or classroom. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.